Good morning, class. My name is Dennis Ho. Today we're going to be talking about probability. Now, all probability is the way that we talk about or describe the likelihood or chances of certain things happening when we don't know their outcomes for certain. And it's a super, super useful tool in the real world because so much in the real world is uncertain or unknown. Let me give you an example. If I take out my 5-year-old dog Juno outside and I tell her to sit and stay, there's a chance she'll listen to me, but there's also definitely a chance that she'll just look at me like I'm crazy and then do whatever she wanted to do anyway. It's unknown, it's uncertain. So I want you to turn to the person next to you and just take the next 10 seconds to come up with something else in the world that's uncertain or unknown. Awesome. So now let's say I point to the group over here and I ask, what did you guys come up with? And let's say they say, oh, we came up with the weather is uncertain. That's a terrific example. The weather is definitely uncertain. And let's say we just pick one thing, like whether it's going to rain. Whether it's going to rain in Chicago tomorrow morning. I feel like it's rained in Chicago the last 5 days in a row, so maybe it's a really, really likely thing to happen. Is it possible that it could be so likely it's like 150% likely to rain tomorrow morning? Right, it doesn't really make sense, right? And the reason is because even if something is really likely to happen, if it's a sure thing, the highest it could ever be is a 100% probability. I guess like on the flip side, who came up with something that was really unlikely to happen? Right, so let's say the group over there came up with winning the lottery. That unfortunately is a very unlikely thing to happen. But could it ever be so unlikely to happen that it's like a negative 50% probability? Right, it can't, because that doesn't really make sense. Even if something is really, really unlikely to happen, the lowest probability it could ever have is 0 probability. That just means it won't happen at all. And that's kind of the first big takeaway of the lesson, is that probabilities are always between 0% and 100%. They're always bounded by those two. So moving on, let's say something a little more concrete. I brought a nickel here. I was looking for a quarter, but I have a nickel. It has two sides to it. It has one side that's heads and has one side that is tails. It can only land on one of those two sides. So intuitively, who can tell me the probability or the chance that it lands heads up? Right, 50%. And who can tell me the probability or the chance that it lands tails up? Right, 50%. And you came up with that intuitively. We'll talk about how you come up with that mathematically in the next lesson. So now one thing you'll notice is that if you take those two chances of heads up or tails up, 50% of each, and you add them together, you'll get 100%. And that's kind of the next big idea of our lesson in probability today. It's that if you take the probability or the chances of every outcome possible and you add them all up, you will always get 100%. Now, let's say I gave each of you one of these nickels, because they're cheaper than quarters, and we each we'll do like some flips together where we'll flip them and we'll count the number of heads, we'll count the number of tails we get. We do that a few times, and let's say I did it 4 times, and I got heads, I got tails, and then I get heads, okay? So we did these 4 flips, and I got 3 heads and 1 tail. That doesn't really make sense because I know we said we expected the probability to be 50% of each, which means that we should get 2 heads and 2 tails. Who can explain to me what's going on here? Right, exactly. So even this is kind of like the third and really, really important takeaway from today's lesson, and it's that as you do more and more flips of this coin, or in probability speak we call it, as you do more and more trials of anything, you get closer and closer to the true probabilities, the true chances of what you expect to see. And that's a really important idea. It's like the cornerstone of all statistical analysis and surveying and even scientific experiments. That's kind of how this connects to other different disciplines. So I encourage you to do this at home. You can flip the coin 100 times, or you can throw 100 cards in the air, or 100 coins in the air. Count how many of them come up heads. It'll be a lot closer to 50% the more you do. So now let's just review real quick. Let's review the 3 big points that we had. First big point. Who can tell me probabilities have to be between what and what percent? Yes. Excellent. Between 0 and 100%. And who can tell me if you add up the probabilities or the chances of all expected outcomes, what do you get? Exactly, you get exactly 100%. And lastly, Do you have to do more or less trials to get closer to the true probability of any experiment or anything? Exactly, yes. You have to do more trials, you get closer to the exact probability that you expected to have. Thank you. You guys are the best.